So a lot of appraisers are scared about getting in trouble, and rightfully so. Who likes to be in trouble? Raise your hand if you like to be in trouble. I used to get in trouble as a little kid. I did not like getting in trouble. However, I'd rather get a whooping from my mom than my dad, right? Because we get her the big belts, and those didn't hurt very much. Dad knew to get those little skinny belts, and those hurt bad. But nobody likes to get in trouble. We try to be on our best behavior. And gosh, in this market, in this society, someone can accuse you of doing something wrong. Your regulatory board has an obligation to review that. And so we can't just get mad at them. And maybe that's something we need to petition and try and get changed. You know, I've been a firm believer that really the entity that should have the right to file a complaint against you is your client, period. And I really believe that. Maybe we ought to rally the troops and try and get that changed with the ASC. But as of right now, in most states, anybody can file a complaint against you for any reason. And the board has an obligation to conduct an investigation. And what's really frustrating is if they find that you've made an error and it wasn't even part of the complaint. Gosh, that's frustrating too. But I want to have a conversation. I got a really special guest. You're going to love this guy. And we're going to have a conversation about complaints, about best practices, about USPAP compliance, how to try to keep yourself out of trouble. And I think you're really going to like this conversation. So hurry on back and join the conversation. Hi, this is Bryan Reynolds. You're listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast, brought to you as always by the great folks over at Appraiser eLearning. You need some education? Check us out at AppraiserELearning.com. You'll be glad you did. A special shout out, especially to keep you out of trouble, LI Administrators and Insurance Services. Thank you for your continued support of the Appraisal Update and our webinar, the Appraisal Report webinar. We certainly appreciate that. Listen, I'm super excited. I met this guy a few years ago, and we found out we had a lot in common, and we just I don't know if we like each other. I guess we like each other, but we're pretty excitable guys. He's an appraiser. Don't hold that against him. He is an AQB-certified USPAP instructor. He's an instructor for McKissick. He's a lawyer down in North Carolina. He was the executive director of the Real Estate Appraisal Board there, the chair of the Real Estate Commission. Just a good guy. Mr. Mel Black. Mel, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Bryan. Thanks for the invitation. We're going to have a good time. And I want to thank McKissick Learning for allowing me to be here, and want to thank my law firm, Everett Gaskin Hancock in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I know we're going to have people from all over the country, so let me get my disclaimer in, okay?
Go ahead. This is that lawyer stuff coming out in him. He can't help himself. Go ahead, attorney.
What I say today is legal advice for any particular matter that you have going on. There's no attorney-client relationship formed during this. My attorney hat is out my truck. And I'm just talking to you as a longtime appraiser, and Bryan and I are going to do some things for you that might be helpful.
Very good, very good. What he said for me too. How's that? I think people know that about me already. I do encourage folks always to go to the authoritative source. You know, some of this stuff just drives me crazy. Well, Fannie Mae requires this. No, they don't. Yes, they do. Go to the authoritative source. USPAP says this. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Go to the flipping authoritative source, USPAP in that case, right? So, but let's talk about it. So, Mel, you've been around the block a little bit.
I'm just going to add something. One of my favorite things to do, and you and I have both been around a long time. We talked to a lot of appraisers, and they'll say, well, USPAP requires, or USPAP says you can't. One of my favorite things to do is to say, oh, well, I like learning about USPAP.
What page is that on?
What number is that on?
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I use that with clients. Well, yeah. you know, USPAP said, really, what page? Where can I find that? Where can I find that in the document? I'm like you. I always love to learn. So anyway, so let's just dive into it. I mean, Mel, you're an attorney down in North Carolina, a practicing attorney and an instructor. You're a USPAP guy, and man, you quote USPAP better than I do. I mean, he always is rattling off the page number and a line item, and gosh, I don't know what that. I don't sleep with USPAP for crying out loud. I think you sleep with it under your pillow. But let's talk about some of the
one trick pony. That's all it is. It's a party trick.
Let's talk about some of the common problems that we find appraisers get themselves into, and maybe some things that they could try to do to avoid that, right? Or if they find themselves in the hot seat, whether that be, in front of the regulatory board or whether it be in a court of law. What are some things that they can do on the front end? So if they find themselves in that hot seat, they can say, yeah, I did that, and let me explain how I did it or why I did it, right? Instead of being defensive, they'll have that information and be ready to talk intelligently about why they did what they did and show that trier fact they didn't do anything wrong. So let's cover some of the things you've seen as an educator and litigator, executive director. What are some of the things that have come across your desk that maybe we as practitioners need to do a little better?
Well, I think when you look at the first two standards of USPAP, Standard 1, developing, Standard 2, reporting, I think sometimes a lot of appraisers will do a pretty darn good job on their Standard 1 development, but now it's time to issue an appraisal report or a restricted appraisal report, most likely an appraisal report. And sometimes the level of detail in that report just is lacking, or what they've done in their development of the appraisal doesn't show up in the report. And of course, you want to have sufficient information for your intended user to be able to understand what you've done. You don't want to be misleading, but I think sometimes we just don't write enough. We just don't explain enough. And I've got lots of different areas if you want to hear a couple.
Yeah, I want to hear a couple. Go.
All right. Here's an easy one. Consistency. And I think what appraisers do sometimes, particularly in their additional comments in what they're writing, they'll add a paragraph and not read the other paragraphs that are already in the report. Or they may add a USPAP addendum or something else, but not compare it with what's already there. I mean, sometimes you're a little surprised to see that exposure time is in there 3 different times. And guess what? The appraiser's opinion of exposure time in that range is different each of those 3 times. Well, which one did you mean? Which one am I defending? Which one are we going to go with here? And that's misleading. And the appraisal board investigators and prosecutors, that's low-hanging fruit. That's an easy thing to say. And what I tell folks in my classes is this: the language in the report needs to match exactly what you did and didn't do. What did you analyze? What did you come up with? What was your scope of work? Did you inspect it? Did you not? Did you develop it? Did you not? And have that language really be something where when you ask a question, you go, oh, right there in the addendum, 3rd paragraph.
Yeah. I think in defense of the appraisal community, appraisers have, it's been pounded into our heads. You've got to have your opinion of exposure time in. USPAP doesn't require marketing time. We're not required under uniform standards to develop or report marketing time. Hello. We're required to develop and report exposure time, right? If it's a component of market value. And so the key there is you've got to do it, but you don't have to say it 3 times. You only have to put it in the report once. And God forbid you put on page 1, you say exposure time's 30 days. On page 10, you say it's 90 days. On page 44, you say it's 120 days. Which is it? Well, it's 30 to 120 days. No, that's not going to get it. So yeah, I've seen, as a former investigator, I was an investigator for a state for many years, and that's something that I saw on a regular basis. And do you think that maybe appraisers that are using templates that's part of the problem, that they've got some of this pre-constructed language that they hit a button, it's in every single report, and sometimes they forget to go back and clean that up or make page 1 and page 10 consistent with one another.
I think it can be, and I think there's certainly an argument for the impactful, effective use of templates when you have the bare bones of a reporting form and maybe even a narrative where you bring it over, and you're adding in those things that make sense, those comments, those pre-written paragraphs that make sense. What I see a lot of problems with is cloning, and I've been fighting the cloning wars for years.
Yeah.
Some people like that comment. Clone Wars, excuse me. God, I missed the movie name.
Yeah.
But I think people will clone and just start having that report there and just add on. And next thing you know, they have this big heaping mess and they didn't read what they already had in there. And then that could be a problem. But cloning, I think, is a problem. And sometimes the inefficient, inappropriate use of templates when you've already got something in there.
You know, back in the day, I tried that cloning stuff, and I just, I know me, Mel. I've met me. And it's inevitable I'm going to forget to take something out. You know, hey, I just did a Gulfstream over on Citation Avenue. I've got a new Gulfstream a block away on Secretariat. I'm just going to clone it all and change what I needed to change. I would rather just take the time to start anew, and because, oh gosh, the one I'm doing today didn't have a deck and that one did, and I forgot to take that one little thing out. Well, I messed up. And so it's easy to do. I guess if you're really good at that and you're very careful, that's a way you can perform. But for me personally, I quit cloning a long time ago because it just didn't work. I just missed stuff. And so I just don't take that chance. When you talk about contradictory statements, you know, I know one that I saw recently. There are 33 comparable sales that have sold in the last 12 months in the market area, right? And then they've got comments down below. First of all, they got one comp that has 14 adjustments. Now, just how comparable is something that has 14 adjustments? Couldn't you find one that had 12 adjustments instead of 14? But then you'll see down in the comments, due to the lack of recent comparable sales in the market area, it was necessary to travel outside. Which is it? You know, in your role as executive director and attorney, you've seen appraisers sit in those hot seats, right? You've been witness to that. How do they answer questions like that? I mean, do they just give up, or do they come up with a creative answer? Because I just wonder, gosh, how do you intelligently answer that question if you're contradicting yourself?
Well, one of the common things I hear is this: gosh, I was just too busy. I was in a hurry, and I had this many to get out this week, and I inspected this many, and I had this thing going on. I was going on vacation, or I had this going on with my family, and I had to hurry up and get these done. That's a common thing, whether that happened or not.
Sure.
One of the other things that I see frequently is somebody has some life event, something going on, health-wise or family-wise, or death in the family, or something going on, and they just keep right on appraising through that. There's times people take their laptop with them to the whatever it is, and they're trying to finish that appraisal report up of the appraisal they developed last week, trying to remember all that. And guys, gals, there's sometimes just back off for a while. Let your client know, hey, the delivery of this is going to be delayed, or I'm withdrawing. Or sometimes you're in that situation where a couple life events hit you. Stop working for a while.
That's great. That's great advice, Mel. I'm going to make a statement, and the real estate folks watching, the realtors and the real estate agents aren't going to like this. The AMCs aren't going to like it either.
Brian, if you've got all that work done and you're just not in the right frame of mind and you need to stop, your signature is not on a darn thing.
That's exactly right. That's a great point.
Your signature hits that report, and those certifications, which we could talk about today too, are on our next time together. I like to say about that. The moment your signature is there, boom, you're in.
And that report doesn't go away once they close the loan. You know, that's there forever. So when it goes into default, it becomes a foreclosure, and they're trying to figure out why the lender should buy back the loan. Oh, well, it was because of the appraisal. Oh, well, let's look at that real quick, right? But yeah, the statement I was going to make is there's no emergencies in real estate. Don't anybody throw anything at me. There's no emergency. Somebody called me one time and said, "This is an emergency." I'm like, "Oh my God, let me call 911. Are you bleeding? What's happening?" I thought they cut their hand off or something, for crying out loud. There are no emergencies in real estate. We'll get through it. My closing's going to okay, your closing's going to be delayed. I'm sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, that's life. It happens. I lost my rate. I'm sorry you lost your rate. I understand that. That stinks, especially in today's market. But guys, there's no emergencies in real estate. Life goes on. Hey, Mel, I've got to yell out to my sponsor real quick, but I know you want to talk about reconciliation, and I do too. So let me do a little business here right quick, and then we'll talk about reconciliation, because that's one that a lot of appraisers have really a hard time answering. A tough question. It really shouldn't be a tough question. It ought to be a question they can answer, and we'll cover that when I come right back. Speaking about liability and getting in trouble and trying to stay out of trouble and having an expert on your team when you do get in trouble. For well over 45 years now, LIA Administrators and Insurance Services has been offering E&O coverage to valuation professionals just like you and I. LIA applies superior customer service, exceptional liability education, and unparalleled claim defense to serve well over 10,000 real estate professionals all across the lands. LIA also offers commercial bonds, general liability, cyber liability, and so much, much, much more. Check them out at liability.com to learn more about how LIA can protect you and your business. All right, buddy, let's get back into this. So let's talk about reconciliation for a minute. When you ask the typical appraiser, right? How'd you get that number? You've got the sale price of all the comps. Let's just talk about, historically, right? When we talk about sale prices. So comp 1 sold for 150, comp 2 sold for 130. Woo-wee. Comp 3 sold for 205. I don't know if that's a comp or not, but it sold for 205. You're calling it a comp. You've got all these little adjustments that you have no support for. I hope you have support for these. And there's more that I didn't put in here, right? Because don't look at the math and somebody say, "Bryan, you can't do math." I get it. Now you have 130,000, 145,000, and 188,000, and you have an opinion of value of 157. And I don't like, Mel, this is just me, I don't like calling this a range of value. We've been taught that, and I don't like that. I think the sales above were raw sales data, or what I call unadjusted sales. That's what the comp sold for. Then you make all these little adjustments, and this is nothing more than an adjusted sale price. We ain't gotten into value yet. 130,000, 145, and 188 are the adjusted sale prices. And we may fall within these ranges. We may fall outside the range, believe it or not. But in this case, the appraiser opined 157. And what do you get more than often, Mel, when you ask this question? Okay, this is great. How did you get 157? That's what I want to know. It's your value opinion. You're certainly entitled to it. But how did you settle on 157? Because my client likes 130 better, and Mel's client likes 188 better. So let's fight about it. How did you get 157? What's the most common answer you hear when asked that question?
Well, the most common answer is based on a disconnect between Standard 1 and Standard 2 of USPAP. The appraiser has developed this opinion, this reconciliation, reconciliation to the sales comparison. They've got reasons, they've got thoughts, they have analysis, And then when they transfer over and get to the report, it's just not something sometimes that's very worthwhile or actually a reconciliation. When you ask the client, where'd you get 157? One of the unfortunate things I see and quite frankly read, and quite what you want, Bryan, is, well, where'd you get 157? Right there. Read it. That's what you want. Right. Not some explanation that's not in the report.
Right.
But what happens, I see this a lot, is they'll go on and on and on in an attempt to make a reconciliation when it's not one at all. The appraiser inspected the property, the data came from this source, public record this, tax record that, square footage was obtained here, verified there. And I go, wait a minute. That's not a reconciliation statement at all. That's almost page 15, 2/3 of the way down of USPAP, a scope of work and the 6 assignment elements. And right above that, the 4 things you got to do, the type and extent of what you've done. They're explaining what they've done. They're not giving us an analysis. So what I want to see is the magic word in your reconciliation. And here's a magic word, listeners: because. The appraiser has put most weight, or this amount of weight, on comparable number 1. And sometimes I see a period after that. The appraiser has given most weight to comp 1. Well, duh, I can look at that and figure that out. Give me the because. And I think, listeners, you can think of all the things that goes after the because. All the things.
Sure.
You got a long list of those. We can start talking about it, but
most recent sale, most similar, least number of adjustments. Sure.
Same floor plan, all those things. But give me the because. And if they're weighted, what's the weighting and how much? And give me why 157 is where you are. You might be at 130, 140, 145, because comparable number 1 was most similar because it had these things or these features or these relative characteristics. So I think the first step is, let's get away from putting language in an attempted reconciliation that has nothing to do with the reconciliation. It's a lot of times about what the appraiser did and didn't do, the type and extent of data and analysis. It's a scope of work statement. So let's get to a reconciliation statement where we're saying my range of adjusted comps, and I'm with you on that. It's a range of adjusted comps. We haven't even considered the other 2 approaches.
Right.
That this is what I'm trying to reconcile within this approach.
The approach, right?
Yeah, and I'm at 175 because, and right about that. And I really do think you want something defensible. And remember that disconnect from 1 and 2? I really want appraisers, when they're asked the question, to just say, "Oh, it's right there. Take a look on page 2. Or take a look at my addendum language or my additional comments. There it is. Read it, guys. Let me know."
You know, a pet peeve of mine has been for decades, appraisers saying, here's my appraisal. I worked really hard on it. It took me a week. Here you go. I'm finished. Here's the appraisal. That's not the appraisal, guys. This is the appraisal report. It's the method in which you're communicating the results of the appraisal to your client. And as Mel's been repeating throughout this podcast here, and we're getting close to time, and I'd love to keep you here all day, but guys, get this for sure. Mel's talked about it several times. The appraisal and the appraisal report are 2 entirely different things. The appraisal, the development, everything you got to do to get the number. That's standard rule 1. And then you have options. You don't even have to put a big old thick report down your client's throat. You could communicate it to them orally. That's a report option. So you have options available when it comes to standard rule number 2. And I like to communicate at the level of understanding of my client For instance, if I'm doing an oral report, I'm probably not going to say, hey, Mel, it's important. First of all, you understand you're my client. Mel knows he's my client. He engaged me, for crying out loud, right? So I like doing that. As far as reconciliation, and really a lot of things that we do, but let's stay on this reconciliation for a minute, because I get a lot of appraisers that would say, well, I got that range of value, 130 to 188, so I could have been anywhere in there that I wanted to. And I would caution appraisers from making that statement, because as I said earlier, Mel's on the other side. He likes 188. I'm not an attorney, but if I'm playing an attorney, I like 130. My client like 130. I want that. So you're saying that we could change your number to 130? Yeah, sure. And then Mel gets up there and cross-examines you and says, well, then we could change your number to 188. And you're like, yeah, I guess so. Your client's not going to be real happy, and you could actually be sued for malpractice. Say, no, that wasn't value. 130 to 188 wasn't a range of value. That was my adjusted sale prices, and I reconciled the data to 157 in this case. Because, as Mel said, because. Do you think that it might be, we're not talking about USPAP now, maybe best practices to utilize recognized techniques that are found throughout appraisal literature, so that if that way somebody says, well, how'd you get 157? You could say, well, I did a ranking analysis, and this is ranking and that definition of ranking analysis. Or I did a weighted analysis, and here it is in appraisal literature that a weighted analysis is a recognized technique. What are your thoughts on recognized technique, Mr. Mel?
Well, I like it when you use language out of our favorite book. That's in Standard 1, and we both could probably find it. I'll race you to it.
No, I'm not racing Mel. That's for sure.
I like that very, very, very much. And I think using those techniques and actually being able to have that as part of your because is very, very strong and very defensible, and certainly a best practice. Here's what I've done. Here's the technique, and here's how I've used it. And boom, here's why I'm at 175. I think that's fabulous. Rather than, well, yeah, I just kind of thought it might be there, and that's kind of what I did. And so I think that gives you a lot of strength. And here's something I heard an attorney say, gosh, maybe 15, 20 years ago, when they were talking about a complaint and the appraiser responding to the complaint, and they gave all this detail, and the response of the prosecutor was, dang, if they'd have put all the things from their response in their report, we'd have a whole different conversation. But the report is lacking in explaining the appraisal in the process.
So quit putting exposure time in your report 3 times. Put it in there once and spend a little extra time on the reconciliation.
That's not even work. Absolutely. I'm getting my lines together. Sorry, man.
He's jumping up and down like a jumping jack right there. So
there you go. I don't have that across my eyes now. That's good. Spend more time on reconciliation and what's there. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. It's just nice, simple, direct about why I'm here rather than there and there. And here's my because. And the thing that you and I have heard, where are you hanging your hat? I'm hanging my hat on this. Well, comps 1 and 3 were because, boom, boom, boom. Then write about it. And just be able to say, there it is.
I think I spoke about this in another podcast, and so if you guys listen to that, I'm repetitive. I apologize, but I'm going to do this because I want to get Mel's take on it. So let me set this up a minute, Mel. I was teaching a class one time, and Miss Diana Jacob wrote the curriculum. Wonderful instructor, and she was trying to get the student to reconcile 4 sales for land value. And it was going to be a price per foot. And so in some cases, you had to multiply the dimensions of the lot to get the square footage, right, to get the price per square foot. And so you had 4 sales. And for whatever reason, she said discount sale number 2 and 4, right? So basically, you're not going to use those in the final reconciliation. So we feel that comparable 1 and 3 are equally comparable. So give me your number. And so the appraisers did it, and they got their price per foot of the subject property. And then when I asked them, how'd you get that? Nobody wanted to answer the question because many of them just averaged it, right? They added the price per foot of comp 1 and comp 3 divided by 2, and that was the right answer. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, how did you get that answer? And nobody, one person finally said, well, I used the mean. Finally, the student said, all right, I averaged it, okay? And I said, well, what would you say if you were in the hot seat? And I'm leading up to the question for you, Mel, but nobody had a great answer. And I said, okay, ask me. This is my answer. Because an astute attorney might say, well, I'm an attorney. I'm not an appraiser. I don't understand what you do, but it sure looks like you added comp 1 and comp 3 together, divided by 2. I get your exact number. Is that what you did? No, I didn't do that. Okay, great. Then what did you do? Well, and nobody can answer that. So I said, this is how I would answer it. Comp number 1 and 3 were equally comparable. Comparable number 2 and number 4, we discounted because they were the least, really not even comparable. So in my weighted analysis, comparable sale number 1, I gave 50% reliance. Comparable sale number 2, I gave 0% reliance. Comparable number 3, I gave 50% reliance. And comparable sale number 4, I gave 0% reliance. And that's how I got my number. Oh, so you averaged it. No, I did not average it. I gave 50% reliance to sale number 1 and 50% reliance to sale number 3. Oh, so it's just a coincidence that that's the exact same thing as averaging. Yes, in this example, it's a coincidence. It's a recognized technique found in appraisal literature. And so I would be very strong against that line of questioning, right? Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, what might be a good response from because here's what they could say. Let's say that you're cross-examining, or another attorney, not you.
Yeah. Attorney got my F-150 right now, okay?
Not you. But let's say
I'm just an appraiser today. Yeah.
Let's say an attorney is asking an appraiser, how'd you get this number? Let's say you've got an appraiser, they've done an appraisal report, they did the reconciliation, and they're in the hot seat, and they say, I put 50% reliance on sale number 1, 30% reliance on sale number 2, and 20% reliance on number 3. That's how I got my number. And then you have an attorney out there that says, well, Mel, Mr. Appraiser Mel, why'd you use 50% reliance on sale number 1? I mean, you could have just as easily used 55% or 60% or 47.5% or 80%. Why did you use 50%? What would your answer be to that question?
Well, first thing I'll say is what I hope that the appraiser doesn't say. And what we hear a lot of our fellow appraisers say, well, based on my experience, yeah. That's what I think.
Years of experience.
28 years, and I think that's what it is. And I think, goodness gracious. So that's not the answer. But I think you could address that by dealing with a concept that I think, unfortunately, is out there in the public and the appraisal world. And that concept is that people think there's a magic number, that the appraiser has to go uncover the magic number. You know, the value's 900,000. Oh, well, he said it was 893,000. Well, what's the difference, really? So, on that 50, 30, 20 reconciliation percentage, I'm going to be able to say, or I would hope someone would say, that I developed this because here's the relevant characteristics that I use, here's the market information that I use, here's the trends, here's the this, here's the that, here's the analytics behind that, and in my opinion, it's 50%, 30%, 20%. There could be other people, peers, who would take some of that same data and analyze it again, and maybe they do have 40 or 60. But I'm at 50, and here's why. If you think it's 60, that's your opinion. You go explain why you think it's 60, but I'm here to tell you why it's 50, 30, 20.
Love it. And I like the part that this is my opinion, not because of years of experience. This is my opinion because, and you fill that blank in that you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Love it, love it.
Data
love it.
and analysis. That's what it's all about.
And in theory, you could take each one of these comparable sales, and if we could, with extreme precision, make adjustments, then all three of those should come into the same answer. And if we could take the cost approach that we get from the market, the data from the market, and make adjustments with precision and depreciation, we get the same answer. If we could analyze income, which is also a market approach to value, we get this. That's theory, right? But we're never going to be that precise because of the imperfect nature of real estate. Whatever technique you use, I think Mel and I will both agree, if you use recognized techniques and explain what you did, you're going to be in a lot better shape than saying years of experience, or I just rolled out of bed this morning and I like 157 or 175 or 130. Don't do that. Mr. Mel Black, thank you so much for being here. Listen, you're on the circuit a lot. If somebody wanted to see you live and in action, where might you be in the next upcoming months? And then finally, if someone wants to reach out to you, what would be the best way to get in touch with Mr. Mel Black?
Sure. Mel.black@calibrigroup.com. That's mel.black@calibrigroup.com is where to reach me. And as far as on the circuit, I think we've got the summit coming up. We've got Aero coming up. And who knows which ones I'm going to be speaking at next and where. I just enjoyed going to all of them.
Got to get you out to Val Expo. That one's next. And then, but I'll do what?
I have a conflict on that date, but anyway.
Well, I will definitely see you at the summit. So ladies and gentlemen, come on out to the Appraisal Summit in September in Las Vegas. You can meet Mr. Mel Black in person. Mel, thank you very much for being here. I know you're a busy guy and we could talk for hours, I think. So we'll definitely have to have you on the program again very, very soon, my friend.
That's a deal, Brian. Looking forward to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. Stay safe, make some money, take a little mini vacation, and until next time, happy appraising.
The Appraisal Update Podcast is brought to you by Appraiser eLearning.